It's been another tense and difficult week in Israel as sirens alerting us to incoming ballistic missiles and drones have continued to wail several times a day in many communities. But we might get some relief soon. That's because most of the launchers that can fire missiles at us have been taken out. The northern front is heating up with continued rocket attacks from Hezbollah into the Galilee region. Meanwhile, the Straits of Hormuz are effectively closed to maritime traffic. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom everybody, I'm Barry Segal and this is the VFI News. We'll start with the ongoing campaign of strikes against the Iranian nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Last week, the Pentagon announced that the initial phase of the attack, which saw precision weapons being used in order to demolish the air defense system defending Iran's airspace, has been taken down. This meant that it was no longer necessary to use these very sophisticated and expensive munitions or fifth-generation stealth aircraft. Large numbers of older, less sophisticated but still very effective F-18, F-16, and F-15 aircraft could now be unleashed. Even worse for the Ayatollahs and the IRGC, even older but still very effective B-1 and B-52 heavy bombers carrying dozens of old-fashioned 2000 bomb JDAM gravity bombs were soon flying over Iran. This brought massive destruction to the Missile City underground complexes where Iran's long-range strike capability was manufactured and stored. In addition to this, the U.S. Army brought its own long-range HIMAR and ATACM mobile ballistic missiles to bear on the problem, launching their weapons from remote bases on the Arab side of the Persian Gulf. These missiles, guided to their targets by satellites and AWACS aircraft flying at high altitudes, delivered precision strikes, leaving Iran's military forces increasingly unable to effectively respond. But of course, there have been continued launches of ballistic missiles and drones because although their internal communications grid has also been hit hard, there are many units in the field with standing orders that they are meant to carry out even if there is no direct orders coming from higher up the chain of command. Needless to say, higher up the chain of command, the ranks of the IRGC senior leadership have also been shredded, with reports of dozens of generals and colonels eliminated in the opening hours of this campaign. Now, speaking of leadership, this week, Iran's so-called, quote, assembly of experts, unquote, appointed Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of the late and unlamented Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, to be the new Supreme Leader. President Trump was quick to say that this is not what he had in mind and predicted that the reign of Khamenei Jr. wouldn't be very long before casually saying that he, Trump, had other candidates who he thought would be much more suitable for the job. Of course, many officials in the Iranian regime also pointed out that the question of who would lead Iran is for Iranians to decide, and it's really none of President Trump's business. To switch to commentary mode for a moment, these guys are not incorrect to say this. Candidly, I think President Trump is kind of counting his chickens before they hatch, and I respect him greatly. But he's acting as he already owns the place. In fact, with all due respect to the tremendous success the military campaign has already had, there's still, friends, a lot of work to do, and it's much easier to break a country than it is to build it back up again, the way we might want it to be. Now, President Trump's apparent disdain for the plans offered by the leader of Iran's exile community, the son of Shah Reza Pahlavi, is very puzzling. Although I have said in the past that I don't have a tremendous amount of confidence in him or his plan, the fact is no one else has any kind of plan at all. I think President Trump shouldn't be so quick to dismiss it, but as we've seen, he sometimes changes his mind several times a day, so maybe he'll circle back to it sooner or later. And again, I do respect him and the United States of America for what they're doing right now. Now, we're staying in commentary mode for a moment and also staying on the topic of the Shah. Critics of the regime immediately pointed out that one of the biggest complaints against the Shah, who the Islamic Revolution deposed in 1979, was that he was only the leader of the country because of the illegitimate dynastic monarchy system, which they wanted to replace. But now a son has inherited his father's throne in Iran once again, and that's got some in the regime crying foul. However, switching out of commentary mode now, among the regime's enemies, both foreign and domestic, this is also unwelcome news because one of the other big strategic goals of this war is regime change in Iran. That's right, regime change isn't going to happen so quickly or easily. In fact, if you watch the interviews these guys are giving to Western media outlets, they seem to think they're winning, declaring that the reports of their military forces suffering devastating losses are all, quote, fake news. One thing you hear over and over again from them is that there will be no ceasefire until they decide they are ready to do everyone a favor and agree to one. The audacity of this regime. As if they don't need a ceasefire at all. However, President Trump told reporters Monday evening that the war would probably end soon because the campaign to destroy everything the U.S. and Israel set out to destroy in this war is way ahead of schedule. The IRGC responded by declaring that the war would end when they say it is over, and not before. Needless to say, the behavior of the regime is delusional and tragic, but from Israel's point of view, it's actually a good thing. Israel wants and needs this war to continue for a few more weeks because it needs to keep striking the regime until its capacity to continue threatening us has been completely demolished and destroyed. The regime is doing Israel a favor by refusing President Trump's demand for unconditional surrender, because this allows the IDF to finish the job. And it also means the U.S. military will continue to do its part, which is also good for Israel. And I do respect the U.S. military, friends. Personally, I don't think President Trump's statement that the war will end soon should be taken at face value. I think it's likely that he was only saying that to calm down the energy markets because the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has driven the price of oil and natural gas up and stock markets around the world down. I could say a lot more about that, but this is a story that changes literally from hour to hour, not even day to day, so it's unwise for me to try to tell you what might happen next there. But getting back to Israel's stake in all of this, while the American Air Force, Navy, and Army are pounding Iran's ballistic missile launchers, storage sites, and production facilities, the Iranian Navy and nuclear sites, the Israeli Air Force is going after the regime itself. Targets include IRGC headquarters, police barracks in major cities, and the besieged militia. This is meant to degrade the ability of the regime to put down an uprising by the people of Iran, which has been an on-again, off-again strategic objective stated by President Trump. Another Israeli target set this last week included oil storage facilities in Tehran. The fires that these strikes sent up massive clouds of black smoke, making the air unbreathable, according to some witnesses. Black rain also fell in the city, which reminds me of similar reports from the Gulf War I back in 1991, when Saddam Hussein set the Kuwaiti oil fields on fire. That is very gross and very bad for the health of human beings. It also drew criticism for Israel from American officials, including some of our best friends in Congress. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham said that if the goal is to help the Iranian people get rid of their regime, this isn't a good way to go about it. Whatever regime replaces this one is going to need revenue from oil production. But if all the infrastructure is destroyed, that will be impossible in the short term. Now, with all that having been said, there's another front in this war, because Hezbollah continues to fire rockets into the Galilee from Lebanese territory, and Israel continues to hit back. Almost most of the Air Force is concentrated on hitting targets in Iran in the meantime. But the Hezbollah attacks, sometimes launched in coordination with IRGC ballistic missile attacks and concentrated especially on the coastal city of Haifa, although they've hit central areas as well, have caused some damage and a handful of injuries that cannot be ignored. There is no chance that Hezbollah will be able to launch the kind of cross-border raids into Israel like what Hamas did on October 7, 2023, because of the IDF's spectacular campaign in late 2024 and the relentless airstrikes which have kept Hezbollah at bay ever since. Now, we must also give some credit to the Lebanese National Army, which has done important work dismantling Hezbollah's infrastructure south of the Litani River. Now, in this current campaign, the IDF has warned residents of villages south of the Litani, as well as in the Dahia neighborhood of southern Beirut, to get out of the way so that they can go in and utterly annihilate what's left of Hezbollah in these areas, meaning Israel. This has resulted in a severe crisis in Lebanon, as around 700,000 people have crowded into the northern half of the country. Everyone hopes that the IDF will quickly finish Hezbollah off so that the internationally recognized government of Lebanon can take full control of the country and everyone can start picking up the pieces and moving back on. Now, speaking of picking up the pieces and moving on when this war is over, Israel is going to need a tremendous amount of help doing that. The economy was beginning to pick up following the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip last October, and tourists were beginning to return as well. But now much of that progress has been lost. Additionally, over 100,000 reservists have been mobilized for possible action against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And all of this is happening as Israel's economy is suffering from the same inflationary pressures as everyone else. Many families and even communities are under great pressure. So here at Vision for Israel, we're doing everything we can in this crisis. So please go to our website, visionforisrael.com, and please watch this short video to see how you can be part of the blessing. Welcome back to the VFI News. Now moving on to related topics. Last Sunday, outgoing flights from Ben Gurion International Airport resumed on a limited basis. Lots of confusion. And tens of thousands of Israelis who were abroad when this war started have managed to get back into the country. Meanwhile, many of our neighbors have also been targeted by Iranian missiles and drones, which the IRGC says are only being fired at American military bases in those countries. What a lie. However, they've somehow been hitting airports, apartment buildings, and energy infrastructure. This has led to tremendous anger in these countries, but they have only shot down incoming Iranian missiles, drones, and aircraft, and not fired any weapons of their own back into Iran. The UK and France have reportedly deployed aircraft to bases in the Gulf that have shot down some of these incoming weapons as well, while several European countries have sent ships and aircraft to defend Cyprus from the possibility of more attacks coming from either Iran or Hezbollah. France has also sent their aircraft carrier into the region and made noises about joining defensive operations, but once again, they're not talking about launching strikes inside Iran. Everyone seems to be fine with letting the Americans and Israelis do all the attacking in this war, while everyone else just tries to defend the energy infrastructure that the global economy depends on. Well, speaking of which, oil and natural gas prices have spiked in the last 2 weeks, sparking fears of a global recession and pushing many economies that were already having problems over the edge. Now, I already mentioned the fragility of Israel's economy after almost 2.5 years of war. And although an overwhelming majority of Israelis support this war, we're all very aware of the price we'll have to pay economically, in addition to the price we're already paying. This includes spending a lot of money, of time over the past 2 weeks in bomb safety shelters, and we've also suffered 13 fatalities and hundreds of injuries, as well as a fair amount of property damage. There have also been IDF soldiers killed in action as the battle against Hezbollah in Lebanon heats up. Once again, the main Air Force effort is and will continue to be against Iran, but large volumes of ordnance are also falling on Hezbollah targets, and the possibility of a ground operation increases by the day, and don't be surprised if we don't have people on the ground already. Hezbollah has very foolishly been firing rockets and missiles into the Galilee region. I love the Galilee. And some of those barrages have also been directed at the city of Haifa and central cities in Israel, often in coordination with IRGC attacks on that city. Needless to say, this is making life very difficult for everyone, and there's no immediate end in sight to this conflict. We're all doing our best to get through this because it's already time to start preparing for the Passover, and we'll talk more about that in the next few weeks. But for now, I want to take a moment to remind you that many Israelis, both Jewish and Arab, live and work in buildings that do not have a designated shelter or safe room. This means that when the siren sounds, they might have to run hundreds of meters or feet to public shelters, or else to do the best they can to find an internal stairwell or maybe an underground parking garage if they're lucky. This situation is being addressed, but it takes time to fix up old buildings and install safe rooms and shelters for public accessibility. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we're providing and continuing to provide portable bomb safety shelters weighing over 30 tons to communities all over Israel, because all over Israel is a target today. We've provided over 500 shelters over the past few years, but many, many more are needed. So please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab to see how you can help and partner with us. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now we're in the home stretch of this week's report, so I'm just going to quickly go over some of the other big stories related to this ongoing conflict with Iran. To start with, we must talk about something that has not even happened yet. The Houthis in Yemen have not fired a single missile at Israel in support of Iran since this war began. That's really amazing, and no one is quite sure why. My own personal theory is that the joint British and American air campaign against the Houthis last spring, along with the extensive Israeli airstrikes on them earlier in the war, did a lot more damage to them than they admitted to. Also, it's possible that the Houthi leadership is realizing that the regime is going down, and there's no sense going down with them. In related news, the Shiite militias in Iraq and what's left of Iran's allies in Syria have also not jumped into this fight, as the IRGC was confidently threatening they would just 2 weeks ago. There have been some reports of sporadic harassing attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, but they haven't resulted in any casualties or serious damage. Once again, I think it's because these guys realize that it would be foolish for them to give the Americans and Israelis an excuse to do to them what Hezbollah has provided an excuse for the IDF to do to them. It's like that old Kenny Rogers song goes, which I love. You've got to know when to hold them, when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Hezbollah is not, and as some analysts have noted, that's just fine with Israel because the IDF was hoping they'd fire a few rockets at Israel in order to provide a pretext to finish what was left unfinished in late 2024. Now, another thing the IRGC was probably counting on that hasn't happened is that the Russians and Chinese are not riding to their rescue in this situation. The Russians are reportedly providing some intelligence in order to help Iran target U.S. bases in the region, and some would say that this is only fair since the U.S. is providing targeting information to the Ukrainians. Nevertheless, this action by the Kremlin is unlikely to score them any points with President Trump and will likely have an impact on his attitude towards negotiations for ending the war in Ukraine going forward. I'll say no more about that because it's all speculative at this point. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, they're very unhappy about the loss of oil and natural gas supplies that have resulted in the Iranians declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed. This is candidly the only strong card the IRGC can still play in this battle, and it's very dangerous for them because it's hurting their own economy as well as the economy of China, which is the only country that might even theoretically be able to offer them any tangible support in this war. However, China must also be deeply concerned to see all their air defense systems and other weapons they sold to Iran over the past several years being shown to be utterly useless against American weapons and equipment, not to mention many of the toys I bought for my grandchildren, which die out after a day. This shows the whole world whose stuff it's better to have, and it also shows China's own military that they may want to go back over those plans to move against Taiwan by next summer. Now, I love many of the Chinese people, don't get me wrong, but the communist government, My advice to them would be to think about it for a very long time. Speaking of American weapons and equipment, there have been reports that stocks of interceptor missiles have run low, but to say that I say this is why these interceptors were built in the first place. They have a limited shelf life, and the West had a need to increase production even before this war started. So this is just the impetus we needed to kick that effort into high gear. Also, to switch back to commentary mode for just a moment, many Christian leaders, including the Pope, are criticizing President Trump for launching this war. I think this criticism is misplaced for all kinds of reasons, starting with the fact that this Iranian regime is evil and demonic, and the people of Iran themselves, especially the underground church there, deserve a better chance for something much better. But beyond that, there's an old saying that you have to spend money to make money. And a paraphrase of that is that sometimes in order to prevent a big war, you have to fight a small one. It's a crude metaphor, but sometimes the world is just like the yard at a maximum security prison. If one gang thinks it might have trouble with another gang, they'll find one of the smaller, weaker allies of the big gang and just pound that smaller gang real hard to let everyone know, especially the other bigger, stronger gang, that it's a bad idea to start trouble. Now, with that in mind, this small to medium-sized war Israel and America are fighting against Iran is worth fighting for its own sake. But it's also worth fighting because it could go a long way towards convincing China not to start a much bigger war by invading Taiwan. And I love the Chinese people, both in China and Taiwan. Let's not start a war. Now, leaving commentary mode but staying with this theme, there's been another notable development here, and that's the handful of Iranian missiles that have been launched at Turkey of all countries and shot down by NATO interceptor teams. This might just serve to remind Turkey of which gang it's in and which gang it's not in. There's been a lot of confusion in Turkey recently over this issue, and I hope this clears some of the air. In the meantime, Turkey's Air Force has deployed F-16s to northern Cyprus, which Turkey has occupied since 1974. Now, that's a great story if you've never heard it, but for now, it's important to note that Turkey has aircraft that are ostensibly meant to defend against Iranian missiles and drones, but they could just as easily be sent to attack Israel, and that's something we're keeping a wary eye on. Now, there's a lot more we could report on this week, but we're out of time, and I want to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news. So here it is. As was sadly predictable, the anti-Israel no matter what crowd led by Tucker Carlson has come out with some really bizarre theories trying to blame Israel for dragging America into an unnecessary war with Iran. But the dippy conspiracy theories don't seem to be getting as much traction this time, with polls showing most Republicans support President Trump's decision to attack Iran, and even some Democrats. In this catastrophically ridiculous media environment, I'd call that a win. With that, I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. So keep praying for peace in the Middle East, pray for the Christians throughout the Middle East, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. God bless you, and shalom.